Finally got that gear wax out.
Righty, where are we going?
Calabogie!
Calabogie.
Jocko's.
In Riley's brand new pickup truck where the air conditioning works for a change. We have CarPlay.
It works so well. We were suffering shrinkage earlier, but it's okay now.
Riley's brand new pickup truck with extra wide mirrors, that new car smell. There's no gum or chocolate smeared into the seats. That was chocolate.
Hell yeah.
Okay. And going for a day's riding in Ontario. We're going to have a lot of fun, hopefully. And mess around with these new GoPro 7s. See what they do.
Yeah, it's fun when you got 32 minutes of battery life.
Whatever happens, it's going to have to be fast. Fortunately.
That's my nickname.
Super fast Riley.
Yep.
Alright.
Hi folks, Riley here from the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club, and thanks again for joining us on another little ride. So as you heard in the truck, it's just Super Dave and myself heading out from Montreal to go to Calabogie for a day of riding. Calabogie's 3 hours or so from Montreal, about an hour north of Ottawa. And if you've been following the channel for a while, you see that over the years there's been a lot of riding for the Awesome Players in the Calabogie area. Not only on the trails, of which there are many and they are great, but there's also the Calabogie Motorsports track, I guess you'd call it, which is a paved track where over the years we did some of the BMW Advanced Rider training courses there as well. And there's some videos about that back in the archive. But back to today. It was Dave and I, and we are now heading down towards the golf course, and this is the time warp feature on Dave's new GoPro 7. Sadly, there's no sound, so I'll probably just throw in some sound from another bit of the ride. And we tend to go to the golf course first because whenever you come down to do the local events like the Calabogie Boogie, which is an event in September put on by the Bytown Motorcycle Association, which is great, and I highly recommend it. They start at the golf course. So we started at the golf course, and here we are paralleling Calabogie Lake before we branch off into some of the more typical trails that you'll see around Calabogie. On this day, Dave is riding his 2009 F800GS, and that's who you're riding along with now. And Dave's got that little 60s series Garmin, which I tried one of those, and the screen was just too small for my eyes. Here you see Dave climbing around in a little sand pit we stumbled across, and you will notice later on that there is no GPS on the handlebars of my 2016 Husqvarna 701 because I forgot it back at the hotel. And that would be on par for some of the great decision making that would happen this fine day.
Just got stung on my forehead.
And you just heard Dave there complaining once again about being attacked by some insect. And he was not talking to himself. Dave and I are connected via our Senna intercoms, and we have a love-hate relationship with those Sennas, meaning, I guess, that we love hating them. The intercom really adds a dimension to the riding that I think we all enjoy, and pretty much all of us now have the intercoms, but they are not without their faults. It is never seamless. Some days it's okay, but you always seem to have to restart because there's a disconnection, or there's clicking, or there's static. And if there's only two of you like there is today, it tends to work pretty good. But despite all the baloney in the marketing brochures, the range is nowhere near what they say, even out on the highway where it's perfectly flat. And if you want to get into having multiple riders, certainly anything beyond 3, the system just does seem to fall apart. So it's a bit of a running gag with us that there'll be the 20 series, the 30 series. I think they're coming out now with the 50 series. And we tend to get suckered in, just hoping against hope that the new generation will work flawlessly, and it never does. But anyways, that's my Senna rant. And here you can see some pretty typical, I wouldn't necessarily call them logging roads, but back roads for the area. And there are just miles and miles and miles of this stuff. And you can see you could fly down these trails pretty quick, but there are a lot of cottagers, so you could be cruising down here and come up against a pickup truck or an ATV. So a little bit of common sense would probably go a long way here if you didn't want to end up wrapped up in somebody's front grille. Here you can see a friendly ATV. Guys, we got to this spot where there was a fence on the right-hand side posted with tons of warning signs, and I realized I've been here a couple of times before. There's some sort of hydro generation plant on the right. But I did remember that you went down a nice steep downhill, and then there was a wicked hill climb. And you had a left branch and a right branch. I had done it a few years ago when I still had my F800, and I made it up that left hand climb, and I remember getting to the top and thinking it was a miracle. So today I decided to stick to the right, which I have come down several times, and it is steep, but at least it's straight. And as soon as I started climbing, the wheel kicked out a rock and I kind of lost it. And then over the intercom, I said to Dave, do you really want to start your day doing this? Because this is going to be a lot of work, and we're probably going to end up having to break out the douche rope, and we're going to get tired and sweaty here right at the beginning. Or should we just bypass this and work up to this maybe a little bit later in the day? And Dave seemed to think that was a pretty good idea, so I turned around and headed back up. And of course, as soon as I got up to the top of the hill where Dave was waiting, some guys on real motorcycles who looked like they were loaded for bear headed off, and they ended up all making it up this hill, but not without quite a bit of difficulty. So we took that as a sign that our decision was sound, because getting that F800 up these hills probably would have been a lot of work. So we backtracked and ended up on this trail that runs underneath a hydro line. And once again, if you've been following the channel, you know when we see a hydro line, we keep our eyes peeled, because often it's one of the few areas where there's some sort of clearing through the woods. A lot of these hydroline trails have a similar flow. You're riding along underneath the hydro lines, there's some nice climbs, and then as soon as you see a downhill, quite often, because at that bottom of that hill there's some big swamp, the trail will break out into the forest to kind of do some sort of a bypass. So we were going down this one hill, and sure enough, in this case there was a little bit of water in this low spot, and we did not know how deep that was, but thankfully the ATV boys had punched through a bypass, and the bypass was pretty easy. Now, as I mentioned before, I had left my GPS safely back in the hotel room, and yet I was leading, and that was just the kind of day we had in mind. We didn't really have any plans, any place we had to be, so we were happily rolling along this trail and socializing over the intercom. So we usually don't include a lot of the intercom audio, because we tend to use a lot of profanity, and also we actually are really socializing. We don't have a chance to get together too often, so when we do go riding, not only are we using the intercom to call out obstacles on the track and recommended lines to get up hills, but we're also just catching up because we perhaps haven't seen each other for weeks or even months sometime. So once again, despite the technical challenges sometimes with these intercoms, they really do add something to the ride that for us works really well.
We're back in the hydro field shortly. Now I remember this. It's good. Oh, water. When you come through that next water, stay to the left because there's a big muddy hole at the top. Okay, this is a bit sloppy here. But I think if we just stay to the right, it's just nothing. Yep. It looked bad, but stay to the right, no drama.
Eventually the trail led us down this little hill to a low spot where there was a creek and a super sketchy looking bridge.
I don't know, but that bridge looks sketch. What's the best plan there? Ugh. I guess it's here.
I thought the right-hand side looked like the best option.
Whoa!
But as soon as my front wheel hit it, I realized the whole thing was super unstable, and that water off to the right is probably 3-4 feet deep. So deep enough that if your bike fell in there, you were going to be unhappy.
I have no idea, mate.
Before we even wasted any time trying to get across this bridge, I did walk across to go see what the trail looked like up ahead, and it looked pretty well used, so it did seem that this would be a worthwhile endeavor trying to get across here.
Anyways, we'll just go through here, right? No, I'll just drive straight over this. It's alright.
We almost lost it there. The rear wheel, as soon as I gave it gas on the wet part of that board, was slippery and it just slid off. So now we're teetering right over that deep water on the right, and luckily Dave was there to catch the bike from sliding all the way off.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, hold on. Down here. Okay. Oh, that's deep.
I've actually had the 701
Get the front
go
over
underwater once before, so I know what it takes to get it running again after that. And really didn't feel like taking half the bike apart and doing 5 oil changes again. So we were going to proceed a little cautiously here. The little problem we were having was that that piece of wood where it was going into the water was just so slippery that the tire had no traction whatsoever. So Dave was going to go around to the front and give me a little yank.
Or roll the front wheel would be better.
And you can see here Dave's using the roll the front wheel technique. That technique works great, and I've got to credit our riding buddy Ivan, who tipped us off to that one. A lot of the times you get more benefit from just grabbing the front wheel and rolling it than you do from pulling.
I don't really want to ride this, to be honest, Riley.
No, get off. You walk on that side, I walk on this side.
We're just wheeling it.
We had learned a bit on the first go round, so this time
You're good.
Dave decided to stick to the left side of the bridge,
Okay.
and I would just act as his safety man. Dave decided to dismount, and he would just
Fucking
clutch it
clutch
across, and I would help guide him.
Okay. Okay.
One thing I've noticed is how your mood really affects how you attack a little obstacle like that bridge. There's days when you are just feeling it, and maybe you roll up to that obstacle and you just slow down a little and then just decide to gun it across. And there's other days where you roll up to it slowly and look at it with quite a bit of trepidation and decide that it's time to get off the bike, wait for your buddies to catch up with you, and have everybody work together to cross it. So sometimes I watch these videos and I see the obstacles and I'm like, why did we proceed so cautiously across that? But in the moment, you gotta kind of go with your gut. We like to say ride your own ride, and it's not just about not riding too fast because you're trying to keep up with a faster rider, but it's also kind of staying within your own limits on that particular day. And I think we've all learned that if you're not feeling it, then listen to that little voice in your head, and if it's telling you to slow down or wait for help, it's probably a good idea to do so. Case in point was our next little obstacle, where it came around this corner and there was this fair-sized log laying across the trail. I rolled up to it with a little too much caution, got the front wheel over, and then got hung up on the skid plate. Dave approached the log, and we knew for sure that if the 701 didn't have enough ground clearance, there was no way the old 800 was going to have enough. So I did a little foraging, grabbed a few logs to kind of make a makeshift ramp, and Dave gave it a go, but it ended up getting stuck kind of in front of the skid plate, between the front tire and the skid plate. So Dave debussed, and since Dave is actually waiting for a hernia operation, we decided to back the bike up, and then I would give it a go.
Straight on the bash plate again.
But that F800 has very low ground clearance, especially with me sitting on it. So the front wheel got across, and once again, we were high centered on the log.
Yeah.
With the new and improved Mark II ramp, we were actually able to just lift the rear rack and get the rear wheel over it, even with the motor off. And then it was time to keep on moving.
It's not tough going, but it's not well used.
A little further on, a trail that seemed quite promising showed the telltale signs of either a dead end or a trail that might only be used by snowmobiles or something in the winter, because it was getting pretty overgrown, a little bit of water in these low spots, and when you start to see this much grass on the trail, you know this is not being used regularly. We decided to, keep going, and hopefully no one would get seriously stuck in this oozy stuff. You can see in that muddy brown water there's a certain sheen to it that you get to recognize, and that stuff stinks.
I don't know. It hasn't been a trail for long.
The trail did get less and less distinct, so we turned around, and now here we are on the way out, and I'm following Dave.
Nice.
And you can see in this mucky stuff, you wouldn't have to sink in too much further before you were going to be stuck on that big heavy 800, and then it would be time to break out the douche rope. So sometimes you're better off turning around. It's one thing if you know that you make it through that 30-foot mud hole on the other side is your destination or the trail. But on a trail like this where we have no idea what's up ahead, you probably don't want to spend too much time and energy fighting your way through a big obstacle only to find out that it's a dead end 100 yards up the road.
Very brambly.
This is when things would get real interesting. Luckily, our problem didn't happen on this trail. It actually happened when neither of us had our cameras running. I was descending a little downhill and I went over a big rock and I heard a tiny little tick noise, just like the rock gently touching the bottom of the skid plate. And then there was silence.
So, this is bug hell. We are stuck in a swamp. It doesn't look that swampy, but it's pretty shitty. And Riley's bike has decided that it no longer wants to participate in the game. So I'm not sure if you can see the bugs flying around, but they are fucking millions of them. Sorry for my language, but at least it's Riley lying down in the mud and not me. Oh, you broke your number plate, Riley.
Did I?
You did. And you can't get that replaced either.
Fucking douchebag, motherfucker.
Centre stand switch is broken, so it keeps stalling the bike out. So Riley's trying to bodge it. There we go.
What had happened was the little point on that rock had somehow reached up, and in between the rear of the skid plate and the side stand is the side stand safety switch, and it was now smashed. Now, as most of you know, pretty much all modern bikes have a safety switch so that you can't ride off with the side stand down. In the old days, on a KLR, if the switch got destroyed, you could simply take the two wires and twist them together and bypass the switch. But on bikes like this Husqvarna, which is a 216, there's actually a resistor inside that switch. And it's magnetically triggered. And if you don't have the right resistance, you can't bypass the switch. So what I needed right now was a 2000 ohm resistor or the Husqvarna factory side stand bypass switch, which I had been meaning to purchase for a long time because I follow a lot of the threads on Adventure Rider about this bike, and I know other people that have had the same issue, but I just never got off my butt and bought a 2-cent resistor or about a $30-40 bypass kit. So here we were, not quite sure where we were, with a bike that starts and runs beautifully, but as soon as you push it into first gear, it thinks the side stand is down and kills the motor. Now, for those of you who have 2017 and newer Husqvarnas, and I think it's KTMs as well, a 2000 ohm resistor won't do the trick either because the sensor actually sends some sort of sine wave signal. So not only can you not twist the wires together, you can't even trick it with a 2-cent resistor.
Getting eaten alive. And the bad news is Riley's bike looks like it's shagged out, and we're going to have to douche rope this out for some way. So our day of riding is probably, well, not over. The fun part of it is over, and now we're going to start the miserable part. Don't have much choice. I would suggest that I don't know what I'm going to suggest. I've never towed a bike, so fuck it.
So at this point, I'm pretty miffed at myself because I like to think I'm pretty well prepared, and I know this was a known issue. I could have taken the safety switch off and tucked it up inside the bike with the magnet taped to it so that it wouldn't get broken, but I like having a side stand safety switch. So I had it on my to-do list to buy the bypass kit and the little resistor. But that was not going to help us out right now. So here you can see Dave. Dave is standing around with his helmet on, waiting for me, because I've taken Dave's bike and I've roared off to try and find a way out of here. Because, you know, to be clear, we're not in any sort of big emergency situation here, because we did have food, we did have water. It's June. It's nice, and it's nice in this part of the world at that time of the year. We're not going to freeze to death. So this is not a life or death thing. This is a pain in the butt thing. Luckily, it's the middle of the day. We got tons of daylight. But what you don't see here is, because when I sped off on Dave's bike, I kind of forgot to hit record on my camera. What you don't see is that there is no way out of here that doesn't involve some pretty steep climbs, lots of mud, and a few obstacles. So at this point, our plan is to tow the 701 out of here using the F800GS. And when we got to obstacles, we were just gonna have to deal with it. This would have been a situation where if we were 4 or 5 guys, it would have been great, because 4 or 5 guys in our experience can tow a bike up anything with a piece of rope. But 2 guys, one of whom's waiting for a surgery on his hernia, and another one who is out of shape and grossly overweight, meant that this was going to be an exercise in suffering.
Oh, we were in comms range again this last few feet.
I found a spot. I went, stayed left, and we got to the log.
Okay.
So then I said, I saw a little trail, so I went back and I hung a right where those 2 cottages were.
Okay.
And when I went down there, you were able to cross the water.
Okay.
Without that sketchy bridge.
Right.
And then it was okay, and then I got to this point where there was, from what it looked like, one big nasty downhill till you got to this flower pot road.
Okay.
And which is here. Where is it? Where's the hydro? Flower Station Road. So where are we now? Hold on. So we're there. So we go shing, shing, shing.
Across the river.
Across the river. Where's the... And there's the hydro line. And eventually we get to here somewhere.
Well, you know where you're going, right?
I didn't want to go down that hill. I turned around because it was pretty gnarly getting up and I was by myself.
Yeah.
So, and that's fine because I can just dead stick it down the hill.
Right.
But the little voice in my head said, if we are here, should we just take a look the other way? Is there anything? Doesn't really look like there's fuck all, eh? That's our nearest road. Like that distance.
Yeah.
And everywhere else.
But this is, if you look up, so you're
road.
right direction at the moment, right? So if you look on this, yeah, the nearest road is off to the right.
Yeah.
Which is where we've already been.
Because just...
Fuck it.
So I guess that's the plan, basically. That's all I can say.
That,
yeah,
I think,
is as close as we ever got. Fuck, we were close to a road.
Well, how did that fuck off? What happened there? No, that wasn't it. That's where we turned around at the cottage.
You think maybe there's a road there? That's a contour line. Doesn't show a road.
Does it not? Okay, maybe that's not a road then.
And there's a big lake.
Go to the right.
So you see, if they had a road, it would have to
Yeah, okay.
Go left or right from there.
Okay.
So that's the plan, Stan.
Going that way. I took these out just in case I had to fight a bear.
I mean, there's a couple of hill climbs that are not hard without pulling somebody, but it's going to be interesting. And there's lots of boggy, there's a few boggy spots, but what I did is I went right through the middle and just paddled, and actually on the way back I just went on the same track, and it was actually quite easy because I didn't have to chew through.
Okay.
So the way we're going to do this is we attach the rope to your foot peg and we go to my foot peg on the other side.
Okay.
So we're pulling low on the bike.
Okay.
And that's about it.
And you're towing?
No, you tow.
Yeah.
You tow and I'll ride the speeder box. So we had a plan. I was trying to keep a very optimistic face on here, but I knew this was going to be a crap load of suffering to get out of here. So Dave jumped on his bike and swung around, and we got out the douche rope, and we were just in the process in getting everything hooked up when a massive stroke of good luck happened.
We've had better.
And two guys on ATVs rolled up the trail and asked us if we needed any help.
So two guys, really nice, a couple of ATVs, and we're going to try and tow Riley's bike out of the woods.
Go right through that bit. Actually, do you want to put this through the hole? Because this will never break.
Yeah, sure.
And then I'll just tighten that. Okay.
Lovely.
We're going to owe you a few beers for this one, fellas.
Oh, no worries.
Well, Riley's going to owe you a few beers. I'm all right. I could just piss off and leave him to it. But
Exactly.
you know, there's a bit of a douchebag move, to be honest. But and if you didn't have a video camera, I would have done it half an hour ago. But you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, Dave, you want to just unslip it and I'll just...
It's off.
What I've read is how you're supposed to do it to the foot peg.
Oh, yeah?
Because then you don't pull the guy over.
Yeah. As I said, I'll follow behind.
Okay. All right. This is going to be magic.
It almost be nice if you could frame it from each foot peg into the center. You want my toe strap? Because then it'll pull easily on both foot straps.
Yeah, but then no, I think we'll be all right. Because it'll probably get snagged in my front tire.
Okay, well, as I said,
We'll try it.
You guys go by and I'll just stay behind.
Thank you. Whew. Oh, I love a wet helmet.
Excuse me. Well.
Well, Dave.
Where'd you guys park?
Where we parked up, we're staying in Calabogie.
Oh, are you?
But once we got a pickup truck there, so once we're on the road,
You're good.
we're good.
Okay.
Gently.
Now, I have never been towed off-road before. I've towed people on the road who've run out of gas or had a breakdown. I once even pushed a CBR 1100 XX with my foot for about 10 kilometers till he got to a gas station. So this was going to be a brand new experience for me, and sadly I had no communications with the fellow driving the ATV. One nice thing about these two guys was that they were locals, so they actually knew these trails really well. We had the strap hooked to his trailer hitch and to my right foot peg.
Whoa! Sorry. Yeah, we got a little bit of slack there. Whew, that was exciting. That was exciting.
The tow ropes that we use are actually made out of wire pulling tape, which is a kind of narrow woven strap used to pull cables through big conduits.
Yeah, Dave, I had slack.
And it's very strong. I think it has a 1,500 plus pound working strength or braking strength. And when he snapped that rope tight, it actually jumped my bike right off the ground. So the strap is plenty strong. And I was figuring out here that I had to keep the strap taut. So if we got into situations where there was going to be a little downhill, it was in my own best interest to drag the rear brake a bit to keep that slack out of that rope, because when it snapped tight, I was going airborne.
Yeah, when I see the slack now, I'm just putting a little bit of brakes on.
The nice fellow on the ATV ended up towing me for about 20 minutes or so. And the longer he towed me, the more I realized that Dave and I's initial plan never would have worked. These muddy areas here, I could feel how hard that ATV was pulling. And there's no way, with the traction available to the F800, it would have been able to pull me up these greasy hills and through those sloppy sections, which means we would have basically have had to try and manhandle the 701 through those sections, which maybe it was possible, but realistically I don't think so. So I think in hindsight what probably would have happened was one of us would have had to take Dave's bike and get to civilization and found someone with an ATV to come and get us, because there was no way another bike was going to be towing me out from where we were.
It's funny, I'm turning the gas. I'm like, got the gas. Oh, there's a hill.
At one point, we came to a fallen tree that had been cut up, but there were still some branches on the ground. And I was kind of curious to see how this was going to pan out. But with that ATV pulling, and it wasn't a very big ATV either, it just dragged me right over it. So it was quite a testament to how much traction that machine had, because I don't think during the entire process I ever saw him spin a wheel.
How did they get over the big log? Pretty gnarly. Oh, I guess he's just going to drive over it, man.
A little later on, we came to the log that we had struggled with a little earlier, and he quite handily just drove over it, scraped his belly and kept on going. And then as soon as my front tire was up it, he kept going, and I was across in a second. That was probably the best log crossing I've ever done.
Buddy behind you can always give you a hand, I guess. There's that house. We were here. Isn't that the house? It is. This is the house where we went down. Yes. So there's got to be a road here. So
I'm not sure how many kilometers he towed me, but eventually we got to a clearing, and there was an old cabin and a gate. And normally we are big respecters of gates, and if a gate is closed, it means people don't want us there. But in this case, we decided we would try to find some way around, because on the other side was a public road, and it looked like over on the right there was a gap in the fence. So we manhandled the 701 through there with the help of our newfound friends, and got out onto the road.
Good luck. Good luck.
We owe you. Thank you, brother.
No problem, anytime.
Appreciate it.
He did all the work. Good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it a lot. 41 kilometers? That can't be right. Directions.
Yeah, but we gotta go around the lake.
Yeah, 46 minutes still.
Shit.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's taking the highway. There's nothing else. So what's the total distance by road?
39 kilometers. It actually says 46 minutes.
Let's just tow it.
You want to try that?
Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we won't do it.
Okay.
I mean, if we do 30 kilometers an hour, we'll be there in an hour.
Okay.
We thanked our saviors profusely, and then we had a decision to make. It was 41 kilometers back to the truck and the trailer. So we had to decide, was Dave going to ride back, or myself ride back 40 some odd kilometers and pick up the truck and then drive back 40 kilometers, and then we'd load up and then drive back again 40 kilometers, or would we just say what the hell and tow it? So we decided that we'd hook me up to Dave's bike and Dave would tow me home.
Your bike's nice and light and I can feel the weight of that. Yeah. I would have burnt out the clutch.
Everything started out all right, but then at some point the rope got a bit tangled and down Dave went. The rope had gotten tangled in my rear wheel, so there was a little bit of unwrapping to do.
Around the other side of the wheel now.
There was definitely a learning process here. What we found out was that because we were going from the left of Dave's bike to the right side of my bike, was that when he did left turns, he had to be careful not to cut them too tight so that the rope wouldn't get wrapped up in my front wheel. We also figured out that if there was going to be some braking that needed to be done on a downhill, that I would do the braking, and that any time the rope started to get slack, I would do a little bit of braking to try and keep it taut, because it was these moments where the rope got loose and then snapped tight that were causing a lot of excitement. This was certainly a case where not having the intercoms would have made this a lot trickier. We towed for 40 plus kilometers and there was a lot of communication going on, and I think without the intercom, actually we probably wouldn't have tried it. One of us would have gone to get the truck, but with the intercom and just kind of an attitude based on wanting to get back to the hotel and having a cold beer as soon as possible, we set off and it went really smooth. We kept the speeds down on the gravel, and then on the last paved section, we were doing not quite the speed limit, but we weren't going so slow that we were a hazard to the other road users. And eventually, without any more incidents, we rolled back into Jocko's Beach Resort.
Well, we made it back to Jocko's Beach Resort. Beautiful lake, Calabogie. So Dave just towed me 41 kilometers with the famous douche rope, and that was after the nice folks on the ATVs towed us about 10 kilometers, or towed me anyways, 10 kilometers in the woods. If those guys hadn't come along, we would have been screwed, because there's no way the 800 was going to pull my bike up some of those hills. Even on some of the gravel roads getting here, the rear tire was spinning, so it would have made for a long day. So thankfully those two nice ATV guys saved our bacon. Dave, what you doing?
Looking at my snapped douche rope. I'd like to say I was not on the end of the douche rope.
Well,
Riley was on the end of the douche rope.
You were on the other end.
Yeah. It's been towing Riley for 40k,
yep.
Which is an interesting experience. I've never towed anyone before on a bike. You do get used to it.
We only crashed once.
Yeah, it wasn't bad actually. It was pretty good.
We only crashed once, and there was one time when you snapped it so hard it actually skidded the rear tire of my bike.
And I made Riley pop a wheelie.
Pop a wheelie once almost. Yeah, that was good.
By popping the clutch so hard that he actually pulled a wheelie on an uphill, which was awesome. So that made him shit himself.
But we're quite happy to be back with the big shiny and the trailer. So now we're gonna pack
Hey,
it
I
up.
don't know who those guys were who towed us out of the woods, but if you ever watch this on YouTube, seriously, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Beer time!
The weekend of riding may have been cut short, but it still ended up being a pretty good time. We learned a lot about being towed as well as towing, and now we are very well equipped for this eventuality. I have the 2000 ohm resistor, I've got the bypass kit, so should this ever happen again, I think we'll be all right. If you'd like to buy one of our stickers, head over to awesomeplayers.com and you can buy one there. You can also join us on Facebook if you'd like to chat. And here on YouTube, please leave us a comment, ask us any questions you'd like, and hit the subscribe button and that alarm bell, and then you'll know when another video comes out. So once again, thanks for watching.